Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be showing you how to identify existing finish on vintage furniture. Let's dive in and learn about how to identify finishes using the chemical method. In this video, I'm going to show you the exact products and order in which to use them to determine the existing finish on a piece of furniture. The reason you're going to want to test the solvents in this order is because some solvents work on multiple finishes. This is such a game changer when it comes to restoration to ensure you have really nice finishes. I'm really excited to share this information with you because it is going to save you a lot of time, frustration, and money. So make sure you really stick with this video because every detail is going to matter. Once you have this information, it's going to affect many of your restoration projects down the road and making them much more efficient. So you have the right tools, you know what tools to work with, you know what chemicals to use and which ones not to use. One of the really fun parts about this video is I'm going to show you a real-time project that I'm working on, which is this massive Burl wood executive desk. One of the really important things to think about as you're learning about refinishing, as you're learning about finishes and chemicals to use, is the actual piece itself in terms of what type of piece it is, what era it's from. And as you start working with more and more pieces, you're gonna gain a great understanding on what types of finishes were typical for certain types of furniture. In this case, this is a mid-century modern Burl wood desk that was produced in the 1960s by a furniture company called Eppinger. But long story short, it's a mid-century modern piece, and typically they would have used lacquers on these. There were some who did, Danish oils, stuff like that, linseed oil, tung oil. But for the most part, lacquer was a huge finish they used a lot back then. And occasionally conversion varnish as well. Because if you had the right equipment, you could spray on large surface areas just like this executive desk here by using something like a lacquer or conversion varnish. For the purposes of this video though, I am going to go through all of the products, all of the oils and chemicals. And while I say that, don't feel overwhelmed. Again, I'm going to explain this really slow so you have a great understanding of each product. I'm going to show you this drawer and show you the different types of chemicals and oils that I placed on the original existing finish of this desk. Now, I already had a very good hunch what the finish was just because I've worked with so many pieces. However, for the sake of your education, I'm going to show you every oil and type of product that's going to be common to use in order to determine the finish. So one of the first products I'm going to start out with is this Danish oil. Very common. You can find this in just about every big box store. And the reason I'm pulling this out first is because the first test is going to be the oil test to see if it's an oil finish. The Danish oil contains boiled linseed oil. So to do this first stage test, all you need is either some boiled linseed oil or some tung oil or this stuff here. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take a drop of it and show you by dropping it onto the original finish on the Burl wood desk drawer. We're going to let that sit for about a minute or two, and then we're going to see how it affects the finish. Essentially, if the Danish oil does not absorb into the surface and instead just rests sitting on top, then you now know that you're not dealing with an oil finish. So now that we know it's not an oil finish, we're going to move on to the next stage, the next chemical to try, which is denatured alcohol. And what this test is going to tell us is it's going to rule out if it's a shellac finish or not. So let's go ahead and put the denatured alcohol drop on one spot. After letting that sit for a couple minutes, we can see this was not gumming up or loosening the finish. So we know it's not a shellac finish. Now that we know it's not a shellac finish, we're going to move on and see if it's a lacquer finish. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use lacquer thinner. You can use acetone as well. They both have the properties to thin lacquer with, and also it's going to react and cause it to gum up and loosen and tell us that it's a lacquer finish once we try out the lacquer thinner. After putting on a drop of lacquer thinner, we're going to wait about 30 seconds for this test to see if the finish starts to become soft or sticky. If it does, then we know we have a lacquer finish. But if it does not, then we know we have a conversion varnish or a polyurethane type finish. And the properties of a conversion varnish and a polyurethane is essentially it's going to form a really shiny plastic film on top of the surface. So over time, as you get really experienced, you'll probably be able to tell it just by looking at it. If not, maybe scraping a little bit of the finish off and looking at the particles. But this is the most surefire way to determine by using the chemical process. Now, since I discovered this on this piece, I'm a little bit bummed simply because it's going to require me to either use a heat gun very carefully and scrape it off, or to use a chemical stripper. Now, in general, I've been trying to make my practices more and more eco-friendly, and also I personally just don't like dealing with a lot of chemicals. So I've been doing a lot more natural finishes in general on my pieces, but also try to stay very efficient with my time. Back to the method I'm going to use to prep the surface now that I know it's a conversion varnish. Again, I'm compiling a few data points, which is using the chemicals, but also knowing the types of finishes that were typical on the mid-century pieces, especially a manufacturer who had the capabilities to make such a nice desk like this, points to the likelihood that they would have used a nice industrial piece of equipment, proper spray gun and whole spray setup in order to apply conversion varnish. Conversion varnishes require a lot of skill and finesse. It's a really, really durable finish. That's why you have to use chemical stripper to get it off, but you got to know what you're doing. If you apply it too thin, you can have issues, or too thick, you can have issues. We'll get into that more on other videos. Right now, just talking about my game plan for this piece and the prep work in order to get this surface ready for what I want to do with it. I did do the heat gun on a few areas with the scraper carefully, and it was just taking quite a long time. So what I decided to do different was take a little bit of chemical stripper and actually steel wool, especially on this top, which was very, very worn down actually. So there wasn't a ton of conversion varnish left on this. And I'm just gonna by hand go at it with the steel wool. And I just want to be really careful on the surface. I don't want to even break out a sander if I don't have to. I just try to do things as minimal as possible, as efficient as possible. And to explain a little further about my game plan on this desk, I really wanted to use the natural oil that I've been using a lot lately, which is the Rubio Monocoat product. And with that, it's going to be a hand rubbed finish. So I really got to get down to the bare wood on this, but even still, I don't want to like strip away too much of the color, the coloration underneath. There is one spot on this desk that I need to put some oxalic acid on because there's a little fading happening. But again, just getting back to determining the finish, that is the process you want to go through in that order. Start with the oil to see if it's oil based, then go to the denatured alcohol to see if it's a shellac finish, then go to the lacquer thinner to see if it's a lacquer finish. And if it's none of those things, then you're left with conversion varnish or polyurethane in almost every circumstance. All right, now that we determined that was a conversion varnish finish on that desk, now we get to move on to the final added bonus one, which is the wax finish that I promised you guys. So here I have a board and you can definitely see the sheen difference. This side is a wax finish. So this is actually Rubio Monocoat. So it's a hard wax oil technically, but it has wax in it. And then this side is actually lacquer and has toner. It's much richer in color because of the toner, but you can definitely tell the sheen difference from it being a lacquer finish. So good to have a little comparison here to show you. And then we're gonna do a demonstration test on this other side. But first, I want to explain the process of how to identify a wax finish. Identifying whether furniture has a wax finish can require a few simple steps. The first one is you can give it a close look visually to see what the surface looks like. In general, a wax finish is going to be a lot more of a matte finish that you can train your eye to. And again, great comparison here. This is a satin finish and it is lacquer, but you can see the drastic difference in the sheen. So in general, often a wax finish imparts a more soft, low sheen to the wood rather than most other finishes. Wax finishes also may often have somewhat of an uneven finish due to usually the variation in how open the grain is in certain areas of the wood. So the wax kind of can settle and you can see a little more variation in the finish, more typical with wax finishes. Next is the tactile examination, where you basically can run your fingers along the surface to feel it out. It's not going to feel as glossy as most other finishes. It's going to feel softer and a little less slick, if I were to try to define it. You can also even take your fingernail and lightly scratch at the surface. Assuming there's a decent amount of wax still on there, you can sometimes be able to see your nail mark, not damaging the wood, but just you'll see it kind of scratch into the wax and easily make a visual, mark. So that's another way to tell with the tactile approach. Then we have the water test, which is not always a surefire, definitive way to confirm it, because there are other finishes that should ultimately resist water, but the wax is going to typically cause the water to bead up on the surface. So you can do a little water drop test on an inconspicuous spot to also see how it reacts to help further confirm your sequences of tests. So I'm going to actually do that test here, grab some B-roll with my phone, and show you this here in a second. So you can see this bead of water that I just put on is sitting right on top and not penetrating into the wood. Look at that. You can see it just beading to the top. So now I'm going to just wipe that dry. So there you go. That is the water test to help confirm. And typically, again, it's going to react in that manner if you have a wax finish, especially that's still intact. If the majority of the wax has been rubbed off, then obviously the water is going to seep into the wood a little easier. I want to mention the historical context as well. If you're working on a piece that is more of an antique age, approximately 100 years or older, then it's more likely to have a wax finish. Wax was a very common finish on furniture before the advent of synthetic modern finishes, such as polyurethane and lacquers as we know them today, and other waterborne type finishes. And lastly, I want to mention, don't forget to check the manufacturer's information. If you're able to get an ID, say through a label on a piece of furniture or by researching and discovering the designer or manufacturer, if you can track down the manufacturer's information, you may be able to see some sort of product spec sheet or brochure even from the past explaining what type of finish they would have used on the piece originally, which might help you in determining the finish current day. And this applies to not just the wax process, but of course all of the different finishes we talked about in this video. So by combining these methods I've mentioned, you can usually identify whether or not a piece has a wax finish. Remember that some furniture, especially if it's a lot older, can have multiple types of finishes, such as an oil-based finish and then a top coating of wax, or some other types of varnishes or shellac even, and then someone put wax over top. You never know. So keep that in mind. Even if you've determined what the top coat is, there might be something else underneath, especially if the top coat is a wax coat. I sincerely hope this has greatly benefited you in your restoration journey. If you'd like to majorly elevate your restoration and refinishing skills, you need to be in the Revision Restoration community. It's a hub of restoration enthusiasts and vintage furniture resellers from all over the world. And we have people who are just starting out on up to experts like myself. So you'll find excellent support no matter where you're at on your journey. Click the link to join. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Leif, and until next time, keep making old furniture beautiful again.